Good evening, everyone. So sorry about that. We were dealing with some technical difficulties, but we persevered and we were able to figure it out together. So again, thank you so much for waiting. My name is Max Young. And I'd like to thank you all on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore for tuning in tonight. Tonight, we are lucky to have with us Deborah Lott, who will be in conversation with Barbara Abercrombie, discussing her new book, Don't Go Crazy Without Me. Again, we're incredibly grateful that you can make it tonight and that our bookstore is able to continue bringing authors and their works to our community during this time. Tonight's event includes a Q&A portion, so if you'd like to submit a question, go ahead and click the Ask a Question button down here, and you can vote for which questions you'd like, and whichever one gets the most votes, we'll go ahead and answer those first. And lastly, if you're interested in supporting our bookstore, you can go ahead and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book by going ahead and clicking the green button down here, and it'll just take you to our website. But with all that out of the way, let me go ahead and introduce our guests for this evening. First off, Deborah Lott is a writer, editor, and college instructor. Her works have been named 3 times as Notable Essays of the Year in Best American Essays, and have also been nominated 3 times for a Pushcart Prize. She is also the author of the book In Session, The Bond Between Women and Their Therapists, which was widely praised for its unprecedented look at boundary and transference dilemmas in psychotherapy. Lott serves as a faculty member at Antioch University, Los Angeles, where she teaches creative writings and literature courses and serves as editor to Two Hawks Quarterly. Barbara has published novels, children's picture books, including the award-winning Charlie Anderson, and books of nonfiction. Her personal essays have appeared in national publications as well as in many anthologies. Her most recent books are A Year of Writing Dangerously and Kicking in the Wall, and her next book, titled The Language of Loss, is expected to release this November. And I'll go ahead and link the book in our little chat section. You can go ahead and pre-order it from our bookstore if you'd like. Barbara has also received the Outstanding Instructor Award at UCLA Extension, where she teaches her creative writing course. But enough me. Let's go ahead and listen to our authors. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Max. My goodness, thank you everybody for sticking around. We were so organized. We were all in the green room, and everything was working perfectly. And then
we're getting echoes.
Anyway,
we're getting
echoes. Okay, are you still getting an echo, Deborah? I get a little bit of an echo. What is it? How about everybody out there? How's it? Do you want to? Are we echoing, guys? Do you want to leave? Does anybody want to write us a note, and we will? Okay, we'll continue then. Are you okay with continuing, Deborah?
Yeah. I'm hearing.
Yes, okay. I want to tell you, we keep freezing on the screen too. I just want to tell you how much I loved your book. I read it 2 different ways. I read it as a reader. It was a book I couldn't wait to get back to every night to find out what happened next. And I also read it as a writer of memoir and as a teacher of memoir. And I just sort of marveled at your structure and the tone and voice of it and the humor in it. And your descriptions. Your descriptions blew me away. I love your sentences, Deborah. You're really a writer's writer. To describe the book, the blurbs on the jacket, I think I have to read your blurbs that 2 other writers wrote, because the description that Mark Doty, who I have a wee bit of a literary crush on, was just the most. Such a gorgeous description. He says, "Don't Go Crazy Without Me" is funny, horrifying, and heartbreaking, and often surprisingly all 3 at once. It's an astonishingly vivid book, and to read it is to be caught up, just as the writer was, in an impossible, crazy family of misfits. Through grace and nerve and will, Deborah learns that you can't screw nature or stop time, as her father tried to do, but you could turn your grief into love. This writer's love for her deeply screwed up family is unforgettable. As the best memoirs do, Don't Go Crazy Without Me makes this writer's story belong to all of us. That is pretty high praise. And then Abigail Thomas, of whom I'm a huge fan, wrote, brilliantly written with grace, generosity, and a highly refined sense of the absurd. Don't Go Crazy Without Me is the harrowing account of a chaotic, bewildering childhood. This reader was enthralled from the get-go, and Deborah Lott is now one of my favorite writers, and I kiss the hem of her garment. This book is a deeply interesting, dark read. I mean, there's a lot of pain in it, and there's also a lot of humor in it. And the tone is so interesting. And I was wondering, did you have to start writing it to discover the tone or the voice of it, or did you find that wonderful mix of dark and humor just as you started to write?
I'm still echoing. Are we okay with this echo? I'm not sure. I think Max had me change to HD and it created an echo. Can you guys hear me? I'll just hear myself in stereo. I think the tone of the book. Oh, I'm getting a thing. If you go to the same bar where you changed HD, you turn off studio sound. Where's studio sound? Where's studio sound? Okay, is that better? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No?
Can you turn it up a little bit?
Let me try this. Is that better? Yes? No
Yes.
echo?
Yes.
Okay. All right, the tone of the book. So the tone of the book is pretty much the tone of my childhood. I think that it actually felt like that growing up. I don't know how to do that. It was funny and it was dark, and we would be laughing even when it was really dark. So I think the tone came pretty naturally.
Can you turn up the volume a little bit?
Hold on one second. More technical issues. Okay, is that better? Can you hear me
Yes.
now?
I can hear you now.
How do I do that? Hold on, more technical issues here. What are we doing? Hold on, everybody hang in there, have another drink.
Yeah, I hope you're all pouring a little wine or something, or
I think
enjoying yourself.
that's what's going on right now is actually more harrowing than my entire childhood. Actually, much worse. We didn't have technical glitches.
That's very funny.
I don't think they can hear me at all now. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Is that better?
Yes, I can hear you. The headphones
all right, I'm
work.
just going to carry on here. I'm going to pretend I'm British and carry on. Yeah, so I think the tone came pretty naturally to me. What's interesting to me is that some readers say to me, the book is so dark and depressing, and some readers say, I can't stop laughing. So I think it's kind of both, and I feel both. I can't believe you just did. I feel both when I was writing it, and when I read it now, I feel both.
I think
Okay.
I read it as both. I mean, there were some really hard parts to read, but then you just have this delicious dark sense of humor that never felt forced. It would surprise me as I read. How long did it take you to write this book?
About my whole life. I mean, I feel like I started writing it on the playground when I was 8 years old, and the other kids were playing, and I didn't want to get hit by the ball. So I started writing stories in my head of what was going on in my life. It took me many years, many iterations, and I probably have another 3 books the length of the book I published that got thrown out of this book. So it took me a very, very long time.
Um, one thing my memoir students always worry about is, what are people going to think? What's my family going to think? Are they going to sue me? Are they? And one student's family did sue her, but they're so worried about. I mean, and you just, how did you get past? How did you get past that?
Well,
Worrying
okay.
about what
So
they think.
there are
Hmm?
some books it's a lot easier to write when your parents are both dead. And my
Yeah.
parents were both dead by the time it came to publish this. And my brothers really don't read it. Neither one of them wants to read it. One says, I lived through it. Why should I have to read it? And the other one says, he did read. I had an op ed in the LA Times, which he did read because it came in his morning paper. And it was about the can opening ritual that my father would do when he was afraid that all the food had botulism. And he
Yes.
said, why are you still fixated on Dad? And then I found out from my niece, who's actually on this crowdcast, that he still does the ritual. He just doesn't know why. He doesn't remember why. So they didn't read it. I think that my family is pretty tolerant. I think they accept that I'm a writer and that everything is material, and there's not much you can do about that.
But even so, I think a lot of writers, did you ever feel that you were telling family, did you ever hesitate because you were telling family secrets?
Um,
Or was it just your story to tell and you,
I felt like I was telling secrets. I'm not sure whose secrets they were. I mean, I guess I felt like they were more my secrets, as long as I wasn't writing
yeah,
with a revenge motive. I mean, some memoirs you read, you go, this is a revenge memoir.
right,
I wasn't writing for
right.
revenge, and I tried to write with empathy for everybody. Um, so, and there
That's
were, I
so,
mean, I don't think my family had a lot of secrets that were sort of the shh, don't tell, because everything was out in the open all the time.
right, right. You do write with enormous generosity and love, I think. And I believe that the best memoirs are, showing warts and all, but also with great generosity. I love the structure of it. The I love the way you started in the present, and then you went back to being 16 briefly, and then you went back to being 4 years old. Way you went back, and every time you sort of would, every once in a while in the book, you'd come up for air in the present. It felt like, um, and it was sort of relieving because we knew you were going to be okay. Everything was going to
Right.
turn out okay. Um, um, and I love what you said about telling your own story in the beginning. Would you read the opening 2 pages,
Sure,
please?
absolutely. And I just want to say I came to the structure of having the present day being in the book pretty late in the process of writing it. Um,
Ah,
okay, I'm going to read it and I hope I don't echo too much. Prologue, present, UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute, Tuesday, 1 p.m. The three psychiatrists and I sit at the conference room table writing trauma case studies. As a professional writer in the room, my job is to smooth out the prose, prune the jargon. We're writing about children to whom awful, sometimes unspeakable, things happened. The psychiatrist would say these case histories are factual, but I know they are stories, and like all stories, have inciting events, climaxes, and resolutions. As readers, we all long for epiphanies and revelations, redemption and happy endings. But shift a few words or reorder paragraphs, and epiphanies evaporate. Redemption erodes to reveal darker currents. As I write these children's stories, I wonder which of them will grow up to be memoirists, compelled to put down their own versions. I also can't help but think about my own story and all the various ways I could skew it and what I will inevitably leave out. I can't help but wonder why I feel compelled to tell it, as if I could still get it right, as if I could fix my childhood firmly in the past and not feel haunted by it, as if I could achieve clarity. But the truth is, I don't want only clarity. I also want to slow down and relive the best glimmering moments, to wash the terror out of the bad parts, to get it all back, only better this time, to feel some kind of pure love again. What I can't tell the psychiatrist is that down the hall from this room lies another room that holds a critical piece of my own story. Though it's a cliche that people go into this field because of less than idyllic upbringings of their own, these psychiatrists never talk about their own histories, at least not here and not to me. I am the one who knows she is passing. The renowned head of the center, a brilliant, charismatic man in his 60s, leads the discussion. Strict hierarchies are observed in medicine, still largely patriarchal hierarchies. His colleagues defer to him. I try to appear as if I'm deferring to all of them. The clinicians in this room identify with the doctors in these case studies, the protagonists in these stories. I identify with the children, standing in for them with an empathy that feels a little too raw. Did you hear what the child actually said? And isn't this therapist sounding awfully preachy? And yes, but, and what if, and are you sure the emperor's wearing clothes? Because I can't stop seeing his nakedness. I repeatedly interrogate these experts' basic assumptions. In much of my life, I've become the interrogator of basic assumptions. The director's shouting over his colleagues now, using his clout to shut down some minor controversy. Does my ire rise because he reminds me of my father? Maybe I'm overly sensitive to markers of blinding paternalistic narcissism. The truth is, I'm simultaneously attracted to and allergic to them. I try to hide my allergy because it can get in the way of my deference. But it's too late. I've been caught rolling my eyes again. I make amends, look down at my notepad, write furiously, nod. Do these doctors see the signs of my childhood history in my incessant interrogations and what they call my provocative questions? Can they feel my reflexive skepticism at war with my hunger to believe? Can they perceive all the ways my past reverberates in this room?
And then your next chapter, the next chapter is not is 50, was that 50 years ago? 40 years ago? 50 years ago.
Long time ago. 16, yeah.
It was
1968.
yeah. And you switch to and then you're the patient and then you go back to where you're 4 years old. I love as if I could still get it right, as if I could fix my childhood, as if I could achieve clarity. Do you think this is why we write memoir?
I absolutely
why
do.
do we write memoir?
I think we
Why do you
write
write?
memoir to get it back only better, to slow it down and really look at it in a way that you can't look at it when it's happening. And I think to make a beautiful object out of something that maybe wasn't beautiful at the time. I mean, I think once you get it down on the page, it becomes something separate from you, and it becomes this kind of literary object that you can shape. I mean, I think I wrote because I wanted to make something beautiful out of my past and to have that kind of leisure to slow it down and relive my childhood as an adult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love what you wrote, to wash the terror out of the bad parts and to get it all back. And you feel that that's what you did. You turned it into art.
And don't you think, I mean, you've written so much, Barbara, and inspired so many people to write memoirs and to just tell the truth. Don't you think that people on a certain level are trying to get it back only better?
I think so. I think they're trying to find some meaning in it too, to find out what if you can find meaning. And I'm going to ask you later to read one of the epiphanies in the book, which I just think is so beautiful. And I'm going to be curious if you found it in the writing. Remind me to ask you that again when I come to that question.
Yes.
Your scenes are full of such specific detail and description. I mean, it's as a writer, I am in awe of your descriptions. And you create a real world that the reader steps into. La Crescenta, California in the 60s, and that house on the corner where you grew up. And I mean, I realize I picture it as a place I had actually been, but there were no pictures in your book, so it's your descriptions. Would you address the question of memory in writing memoir? How did so much come back to you? And did
Okay,
you
we just got
keep?
two people wrote notes that the screen is frozen. Is everyone's screen frozen? Because our screens are not
Mine?
frozen.
No. Can
Other
you
people
hear
are
us
fine.
out there?
Okay. Okay,
Yeah, as long
memory.
as you can hear us.
So just say it again. Memory. Like, how do you
The
remember so
memory
much
and
detail?
yeah, did details just come back to you, or what did you do with all?
I
How did
think
you get
it's a
all those details?
meditative process. I really think it's a meditative process where
Hmm.
you write from the body. You try to write from the body, try to write from the senses, and I mean, I think there's certain things I remember very clearly, like what the wallpaper looked like in our dining room when I was a kid, and what happened when that wallpaper was replaced with something that I didn't love the same way, and how I kept imagining that other wallpaper there. Um, and then other details I had to recapture by just kind of meditate, remember what you can remember, and then keep
Hmm.
keep pushing. And sometimes things came back to me very, very clearly that I hadn't remembered in years.
I think that's true. When you,
People,
it's
more
almost,
people are
I don't
saying
want to
it's
say
frozen.
magical, or a woo woo process, but you do when you start to write. Somehow the details do come, but you're the specific details. I've underlined a lot of stuff in the book because you are really good at description and description of people. I mean, I can see your father and I can see your mother, um, and it's not an easy thing to do, even when you're writing about real people. Um, Death is an
Some,
important theme in your book. It starts with when you're 4 years old. The guy at the post office in La Crescenta dies, and your father tells you about that death. And you said, you write, I was a child already overly attuned to loss. Um, and then later your grandmother dies, which affects your father deeply and really pushes him over the edge. And then there was the girl who had died in the high school before you got to high school, and you got her textbooks, and her name would be in
mhm,
it, and that was pushing you to the edge. And you started to really get crazy in high school, and you write
mhm,
about that so vividly and beautifully. Um, and then you discovered Bobby Kennedy, and you campaigned for him, and you worked on his campaign, and you were so idealistic about him changing the world and making a real difference. And you were at the Ambassador Hotel the night he was assassinated.
yes.
And what you wrote after that about that is so beautiful. And would you read it? It's on page 243. Do you have it marked?
Sure. And I don't know, we're getting messages that somebody's computer keeps buffering. Wi-Fi problem, I think, but I don't know what to do about it. And I don't know where
I
Max
don't either.
went. Max, are you out
Max.
there? Max at Vroman's, do
Max,
something.
Hi.
there
people
you are.
people say they're getting freezing and buffering, and I don't know what any of that means.
It's most likely not either of your problems. I can see and hear you both just fine. There's like the occasional like little glitch, but that's just bound to happen with this software. If people in the audience are experiencing this at a more severe level, I would recommend checking your internet connection or your router. But it's not the authors specifically. They are both fine with what they're doing.
Okay, it's your fault, people.
All right.
We're
Yeah,
good. We're just so good.
All
Okay.
right, go ahead
All
figure
and
it
right,
read.
I'm going to
out,
read. I'm just going to read. Carry on.
people.
I'm a Brit. I'm carrying on. Um, but feeling, so let me just say what's gone on right before this. I have been crying all night over Bobby Kennedy, and I've been like appealing to my mother for comfort and not getting the sort of comfort I was looking for, and then trying to like figure out where, how do I find a normal kind of feeling? What's normal grief? And this is the kind of epiphany moment. But feeling didn't have to mean my father's version of feeling. Emotion and hysteria might not be the same thing. Could it be that hysteria, even though it might have the appearance of feeling, was really a way to avoid feeling? In the whole period of my father's decline, I'd never cried the way I cried that night for Bobby. I couldn't cry when my grandmother died, and was afraid to cry when my father wailed and sobbed so many times right in front of me. I felt like I had to keep my wits about me when he pleaded with me to call the FBI and help him convince him of my mother and uncle's diabolical plot. I had swallowed my tears when I'd visited him in the mental hospital the night of the assassination. I cried for Bobby in a way I could not cry for my father. Perhaps what moved me the most was what Bobby had done with his own brother's death. He had not folded up into himself as my father had when his mother died. He had not collapsed and left his children to fend for themselves while he regressed. Instead, grief had washed him clean, opened him up, purified him to feel more deeply the pain of others. He'd quoted Aeschylus the night of Martin Luther King's assassination. In our sleep, pain that cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, and in our despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. Accepting loss could lead me to take risks. Trying to hold on was a doomed attempt to avoid sorrow. It was futile to try to screw nature or stop time. Loss accepted with grace could help me do something good for the world. Like Bobby, I could turn my grief into love.
That's so beautiful. Did you realize that before you wrote it, or did you realize, how did that work?
I don't think I did realize that before I wrote that. Exactly. And I think the process in reality probably took longer than it took in the book, because I think that I was probably really devastated by Bobby's death for a longer time. And it was a very turbulent time in the country. But I also think that I had seen other adults grieve. At the Ambassador Hotel, I saw people grieve and comfort each other. And I had sort of this instantaneous, so this is what grief can look like. It doesn't have to look like my father pacing and talking to his mother in her grave and not being able to let go. There are other ways to grieve. And it doesn't have to look like my mother being completely shut down and telling me to get a grip on myself and not grieve. There has to be another way to grieve. And then I had Bobby's example. So I think it came to me over a longer period of time. But then when I was writing the book, it really was a flash of epiphany.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. And I love that you had a fantasy of him as a father, what kind of a father Bobby would. You do have a wonderful description of Bobby Kennedy doing a speech and how he sort of trembled and he looked a little frail, and then he gathered. Do you want to talk about that?
Seeing him at the Greek theater, it was just remarkable that he was so vulnerable. I mean, and I had seen him as Attorney General and in other modes where he seemed much tougher. And it seemed like his brother's death had just stripped him naked, and he was just right there. There was no pretense. It felt like he was just absolutely there with us and able to be vulnerable and exposed. And I felt like he was the perfect father, he was the perfect lover, he was the perfect everything in that moment.
Yeah. I want to mention your mother, because she said something so wonderful, and it ties into your theme. There's a real theme or a thread of becoming a writer in this, Deborah. Of your observations and this idea of storytelling, and you have a whole chapter on storytelling, I think, and at the end of your mother's life, when she was dying, she said, I'm going to miss seeing how the story turns out. Who wants to leave in the middle of the story? It was such a great line. What would you have wanted her to read this book, or could you have written it before she died?
I think that my mother could have handled the book. I think so. I mean, I think that it would have made her sad that I felt that level of kind of distance from her and alienation when I was a kid. I think it would have made her sad. I think it was hard for her to be emotionally available and to be vulnerable. And a lot of what she told me when she was dying herself was that she had gotten that distance from her mother too. So that she hadn't really learned how to be emotionally outgoing from her family. They were Russian. They were very stiff upper lip. I mean, they made the Brits look emotional. So I think she would have been able to handle it. There might have been some sections I would have written a little differently if I'd known she was going to read it.
But it's also, your book also shows how much you loved her and how much you wanted to be close to her, and also how much she loved your father
Yes.
during some really impossible times. That love just carried. It was, you wrote about that quite beautifully. And I love the way you write about your own writing as a kid. And in, and everybody has to buy the book to just read a chapter about Moby Dick like you've never read before in your life. That is so funny and so amazing.
I found Moby Dick the most erotic book I had ever read up to the age of 15 or 14 or whatever I was. I was very turned on by Moby Dick, and I masturbated my way through Moby Dick and wrote a paper. At the very last minute, I had to write a paper, and so like 2 days later, our high school English teacher, who we all had this sort of love-hate relationship with, stood up in front of the class and said, someone in here has written the best paper I've ever read by a high school student on Moby Dick. And I thought, oh my God, and it was me. So all I can tell you, writers, is that's my technique.
It was very funny. Also, around that time, you were, it sounded like a version of writer's block, but when you felt you were going crazy, you started knotting, Notting. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I felt like I had to negate everything I wrote. So after in high school, I got this girl's book who had died tragically in a car accident. And her name was in my French book. And I thought it was a sign and it meant something. And this was going on at the same time my father was losing his mind. And then I got her book a second time in another class. And that just pushed me over the edge. And I somehow got the idea that I shouldn't be writing, that my writing was dangerous, that it had too much power. So I would write a sentence and then I would feel like I had to negate it. So I got involved in this sort of OCD-ish ritual of writing and unwriting and writing and unwriting and crossing out and negating and actually saying the words and then having to put a knot in front of the words. It was torturous. And I really had to fight to get my writing back. That was part of what I had to do to kind of drive myself sane. I feel like I'd been driven crazy and I had to drive myself back sane. And part of what I had to do was write and not be afraid and not have to knot the words.
Have you ever had writer's block? Because I felt like that writing, that sounds a little familiar.
I feel like I have writer's block every day I write. I block and unblock and block and unblock. I think every writer thinks they have writer's block because writing is just incredibly hard.
How do you get unblocked how do you get past that?
I read your books. I'm going to hold one up, actually. I read Barbara Abercrombie's books, which are
That's
wonderful,
so
which will
sweet.
inspire which will give you a million prompts. I do some of your prompts, seriously. I
Really?
wish I'd had all
Oh,
your prompts when I was writing my book. It would have saved me about 10 years. But
that's
no, actually,
funny.
I'm really serious. I think your books are a really good tool if people feel blocked because I mean you talk about writing through the side door, getting in through the side door, and I think that's what I have to do a lot. Get in through I call it the back door, where you
Hmm.
write about something else, not what you feel like you can't write about, and that gets you to being able to write about what you really need to be writing about.
And you write the book that you need to read too. So,
Yeah, and you
yeah,
write the book
yeah.
that you need to read.
Um, what advice would you give for to people who want to write a memoir? What do you tell your students? Because you teach
I
memoir.
I tell them to be ruthless and to follow the shame. Those are my two big
Oh,
pieces of advice. That whatever you're most ashamed of is probably where the heart of your story is. So just follow the trail of the shame and be ruthless. Don't worry about your audience. I mean, you can always not publish it. You can always stick it in a
yeah.
drawer and not let anyone else see it. But you have to get it down first before you can decide. And I know you give the same advice. You have to get
Yeah.
it down before you can decide whether you're afraid to show it to other people. So
Anne
I just
Lamott,
tell them to go for it.
yeah. Anne Lamott calls it the shitty first draft, and she has a very funny chapter about it. I think it's in Bird by Bird. Um,
I think
what was the
I had shitty 39 shitty first drafts.
That's funny. Um, what was the hardest part of the book to write, or was it all?
It was hard to write about the animas and some of the physical obsessions in my family, the bodily stuff. It was hard to write about my father going really all the way crazy and having to think again, was he crazy all along? Was he really psychotic all along and we were all kidding ourselves that he was just neurotic? Or did he really have a break? Because I think that I had always told myself there was sort of a moment when he started to actually hallucinate that was the break. And that before that, he was just sort of lovably neurotic, in my mother's words. But having to revisit again, how crazy was he really? And the sadness of his never really recovering. He never really recovered from his
Yeah.
psychotic break. I mean, he had shock treatments. And after the shock treatments, he said, well, the shock treatments taught me not to talk about these things I believe that will get me committed again. But I don't not believe them. So the craziness was the most resilient part of him.
And you made the decision because you drew a line when you realized he was hallucinating, and and it was very clear in the book. You drew a line, and you you decided not to go crazy,
Yeah,
and and it must have been so hard because you have a wonderful line about your father that you felt seen by your father.
I did.
Do you want to talk about that a
I
little
did.
bit?
I felt
Yeah.
like my father, for all his insanity, for all his narcissism, for all his rages and unpredictable moods, that he kind of got who I was because we were a lot alike. We were a lot alike. I mean, I had to separate to not be crazy, but we were a lot alike, and I felt like he saw me in a way that my mother never saw me, and I saw him. I felt like we saw each other. And I mean, even now people say to me, aren't you angrier at him for all the fears he instilled in you and the way he abandoned you by going nuts and all the models, terrible models he gave you of how not to grieve. And I was very angry as an adolescent, but I'm not angry anymore. And I still feel like we saw each other.
What an amazing thing to do is to write your way out of your anger into understanding and compassion, which is what you did with this book. It's just,
Thank you.
it's a wonderful memoir, and I'm so excited. I'm going to teach it in my memoir class next fall. And,
I would love to come and
it-
visit your class.
you're
Should
going
we
to
have
be
questions? We have 6 questions. Should we look
We have
and see what they are?
okay. Are you? I am afraid to touch anything
Okay,
because last.
I'm gonna try it.
Okay.
Let's see. Was it therapeutic to write this book and move on from your childhood? I'm not sure I've moved on. I think if you look at my bookshelf, I don't think you can see it, but I still have toys. So I'm not sure I've moved on. But there were epiphanies and there were moments when it felt better. And it feels pretty good most of the time. I had one interview say to me, "So are you good now? Are you good now?" Some days I'm good. And then we have a question which I'm not sure I understand. When does this start? That was probably about the
Chaos in the beginning.
a little chaos. We like chaos. As you wrote your book, what were any fears, concerns, hang-ups that created stumbling blocks for you that you had to overcome to keep forging ahead? I think it was hard also to write about the girl who died in high school. I felt like that was taboo because there were people involved who were outside of my family. And I thought, well, if people who knew her read it, it might be hurtful to them. So that was a stumbling block. That was one of the last things I actually wrote. And how do you keep forging ahead? I mean, I don't know. You just keep facing that manuscript, and you have to be a little bit obsessive and ruthless. I mean, I think I was ruthless about feeling like I had to write the book. I just had to write the book. Let's see, we have another question. I like how you juxtaposed your recent experience at UCLA NPI with your childhood experience there at the beginning of the book. How was that experience for you emotionally to go back there as an adult? Well, it wasn't actually physically the same place. And one thing that's not in the book was that I actually had the diagnostic sheet where the doctor had written that I was a paranoid schizophrenic, because I had gone to UCLA for medical care when I was in college there, and for some years afterwards. And then I was going through my file one day, and I saw the sheet with the signed thing saying I was a paranoid schizophrenic, and I thought, I got to get that out of my medical file. That cannot do me any good. So I took it out. So I had that as sort of a memento. So I'd been hanging out at UCLA. It wasn't like the first time that I went back to NPI. I went to college there, and I'd been working with doctors at UCLA for years, so it wasn't really that traumatic. I didn't actually go back to the room where I'd received the diagnosis. Let's see, do we have other questions? Philip Berrigan, my former student. Hi, Philip. Deborah, is there anything you wouldn't want to write about in memoir? Well, my husband and I have an agreement that I'm not going to write too much about him. And if I write about our sex life, I have to say it's phenomenal, the best ever. We just lost Barbara, but I'm sure she'll come back. I hope I didn't offend her. I mean, there are some things that it's probably better to write about in fiction if you're a fiction writer, but I'm a memoir writer. So I except for a little bit of flash fiction and a little bit of short stories, I write memoir. So I don't think any subject is taboo. I think there's just about anything I would write about. I'm going to just carry on. I don't know how we lost Barbara. How do you feel now that you've written the book and it's out in the world? Well, it feels different. I think somehow I didn't think about what it would feel like for people to actually read it and talk to me about it. I think I just didn't think about that. It feels good, and it's also kind of scary. Sometimes the interviews are more upsetting than the whole process of writing the book, when people want to like are really probing some of the psychological stuff, it's almost like it becomes more real than it is in the book. I think that's all our questions. We need Barbara back, but I don't know what to do. Here's another. Oh, we lost our Barbara.
I know, I'm trying to figure it out right now.
Max, help.
In the meantime, you can go ahead and answer that last question, though, if you'd like.
Okay. Can you talk more about how you came to the structure later in the process? Well, I don't know. Like, I had worked with my writers group. I had a really great writers group that gave me feedback. I had editors read the book and give me some feedback. And I just decided that I was really interested in the way adulthood continues to reverberate. I mean, how childhood continues to reverberate in our adult lives. So I wanted to add the present day, and that came really pretty late in the process of writing the book. Initially, it was just a coming of age, and it was pretty straightforward from the age of 4 to the age of 16-ish. And then I really added the present day episodes. And then somebody asked, did you know how to start the book when you started? How did you figure out the beginning? I wrote it in episodes. But I knew that I wanted to write that episode about my dad telling me that this is your first death. And that felt very formative. I think the first things I wrote were really about, there she's back. I think the first things I wrote were really about my father teaching me about memoir, in that he told me that it was important to try to remember our childhoods, and that you could hold on to a moment of your childhood forever. So I knew that I wanted that to be close to the beginning of the book. And that first death, because that was very formative, that I felt somehow that I had to keep that man from the post office who had died alive by continuing to think about him and hold on to him. And that kind of shaped my whole relationship to death. Uh-oh, bad echo. Somebody's saying bad echo.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Deborah, can you hear me? I went out. Okay.
We lost you for a minute.
Yes. Can you see me? I can see you. I don't see me on it. So anyway.
So I answered some of, there's more questions, or we could, what do you think, Barbara?
I'm good for whatever. Max, are you there too? There you go. There you are.
We still have 86 people. Should we answer one more question?
Sure, we can ask.
This is sort of the same question from Susie. Hi, Susie. I think I just answered this question basically, that I started with age 4. And then I think I wrote really formative episodes. So I didn't write strictly chronologically. And then I figured out how to put it together in a narrative. I had whiteboards with kind of a timeline. And then I had another whiteboard that had themes and how the themes were kind of weaving through the book. And then I had another whiteboard for what was happening in the world during the different time periods of the book. And so then I kind of kept shuffling episodes and figured it out. But I don't think I could have sat down and just written it purely chronologically. I think that's all our questions.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap it up with that. That was awesome. Thank you so much, Deborah. And
Deborah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Barbara. Can you hear us?
Lips. I can't hear you now. So
well, good thing we're ending right now. Anyway,
I'm reading your lips, Max. I can see you on the screen.
Thank you to our audience, especially for just persevering through this with us. This was a little rough, but we were able to get through it, and that was a great discussion between Deborah and Barbara. And she read some really inspirational and powerful passages from her book. And I recommend you all read her book. Again, you can go ahead and buy it by clicking the green button down below. And lastly, thank you again, Deborah and Barbara. You two were incredible.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Barbara. Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Barbara. I really enjoyed it. And I guarantee if you buy the book, there will not be an echo if you read it to yourself.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.